have to be a Swiss mountaineer to get up on the stage, I think. No, it's okay. I thought it was a challenge. Yeah, yeah.
Handbreite.
Guten Morgen. Ich begrüße Sie alle sehr herzlich im Literaturhaus zu diesem dritten Tag der Tage internationaler Literatur. Dieses Jahr zum Thema Chaos and Order, USA und die Schweiz im Dialog. Es ist die abschließende Matinee. Wir sind sehr, sehr froh, dass wir da auf einen so herausragenden Gast gewinnen konnten oder zwei so herausragende Gäste, George Parker und Sandra Kegel. Willkommen in Zürich. George, Sandra, very warm welcome to Zurich. Thank you for being here. George Parker ist einer der herausragenden amerikanischen Journalisten, der in seinen Büchern immer wieder zentrale Fragen der amerikanischen Gesellschaft und Geschichte aufgegriffen hat, dafür auch vielfach ausgezeichnet worden ist. Er hat jetzt seit Jahrzehnten erstmals wieder einen Roman geschrieben, ist also von dem faktischen Schreiben zur Fiktion gewechselt, was, so sagt er, auch mit den aktuellen Zeiten zu tun hat. Die Emergency heißt dieser Roman und davon wird heute die Rede sein. Und er ist extra für das Festival aus New York angereist zu uns. Es ist eine große Ehre und eine Freude. So, thank you for coming to this festival, especially from New York, to be with us today.
Thank you.
And for skiing maybe also tomorrow. Extra für uns angereist ist auch Sandra Kegel aus Frankfurt. Sie ist seit 1999 Redakteurin bei der Frankfurter Allgemeinen Zeitung. Sie leitet das Feuilleton der FAZ seit 2019. Sie ist Jurorin, sie ist Moderatorin, sie ist auch Stammkritikerin der Literatursendung Buchzeit. Sie war Thomas Mann Fellow in Pacific Palisades im letzten Herbst, hat dort auch bereits George Parker getroffen. Und es ist schön, dass ihr jetzt das Gespräch bei uns weiterführen werdet. Und hiermit gehört das Wort euch und bitte Sandra und George.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Thank you very much, Nicola, Isabel, for this wonderful festival that I joined since 2 days and gives me the great opportunity to talk to George Parker. We met some weeks ago in Los Angeles, where you were presenting your novel. We are also talking about today, The Emergency. And Isabel already said you wrote that novel because you have, as being one of the most famous journalists and non-fiction authors of the US, I'm an admirer. You have many admirers here in the audience. And now you turned into fiction, and it has something to do with the world we're living in, the emergencies maybe we are living in. But before that, I have to ask you another question, because we are in Zurich, and you are one of the great readers of Thomas Mann. You have read The Magic Mountain, and twice.
But you know,
and your favorite character is Hans Castorp. So you have to tell us here in Zurich, why Thomas Mann, why The Magic Mountain, and.
Well, first, thank you all so much for coming. It's wonderful to be in Zurich. We have nothing like a literaturhaus in the United States. And maybe if we had a literaturhaus, we would have a better democracy as well. So Thomas Mann told his readers, after you finish The Magic Mountain, I'm going to ask you to read it again. And only Thomas Mann would demand 2 readings of a 700-page novel from his readers. I read The Magic Mountain when I was 22 years old, about the same age as Hans Castorp when he went up on the Zauberberg. And I was in a different kind of place. I was in West Africa, in Togo, teaching in a little village, no electricity, no running water. I was alone for the first time in my life, and I was having a very hard time. And so reading The Magic Mountain, I have to say it kind of saved my life, because I took Hans Castorp as my guide to how to think about this experience. Don't think about it as just solitude, but as a journey, as an exploration, as an enchantment. It didn't always work, because literature cannot really save us in life, I don't think, but it can give us guide, inspiration. And so I've always been grateful to Mon, who hasn't responded really in kind. He's a little bit ungenerous in that way, but I've been grateful to him for helping to save me when I was 22 years old, and I've read almost all his work since then. Yeah. Anyway, and so I'm trying to decide whether to go skiing or to go visit his grave tomorrow. And if anyone here wants to tell me which I should do, I'd be happy to listen to you.
Or you could go to Davos, of course. I don't know how far this is from Zurich. Could also be a destination. So, but now we talk about your book. And first of all, of course, I have to ask you why, after 2 decades, having written so many non-fiction books that had been awarded, and writing for the New Yorker for 15 years. Now we read you since, I think, 2018 at the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And now suddenly you come up with a novel. I mean, that is a risk.
Yeah, I had maybe run out of things to say with nonfiction. I'd spent 20 years, really 20 years, saying there's a crisis in my country, there's a sense of decline, things are falling apart, there may be a collapse of some kind, the institutions, the values that I grew up with seem to be disappearing, and I kept saying it, and it kept happening. My saying it didn't seem to stop
So they
it.
didn't listen to
No
you
one
in
was
the White
listening
House?
to me, just like Thomas Mann, they don't listen. And I finally felt that maybe journalism had done what it could. It had reported facts. It had told stories. It had, if it's good, it had shown people a truth about the country. And the country seemed, at least part of the country seemed not to care or not to want to listen or not to believe it. And I've asked myself, who am I talking to? The same people over and over, thoughtful, decent, liberal-minded people. And I never seem able to reach the American readers beyond that group, or at least that half of the country. And after January 6th, 2021, the insurrection, which you know about, for about 72 hours, there seemed to be a consensus that it had been a terrible thing, a real threat to democracy, and that we must never let that happen again. And I thought, okay, finally, we have a shared reality in this country. And maybe partly because of journalism, there's an understanding of what is true. And after 72 hours, it just disintegrated. And 100 different narratives flowered. Many of them, most of them, just complete lies, conspiracy theories, ideological tools, instruments. And that was when I really thought maybe the power of facts is overrated or can't really change people's minds. And at the same time, I had this story going in my, not really even in my mind, but kind of in my chest. The story of a man who lives in a city, and during this period of upheaval and uncertainty after the collapse of an old order, has to go out into the countryside on some mission and finds that the distance between the city and the countryside, which he thought was just a short trip, turned out to be a vast distance, not just in terms of the mental space, that people out there were living in a completely different world from the one he was living in the city. And that was like the little seed. It was a pandemic feeling, because during the pandemic, people in the city were going out into the countryside to live and finding that maybe the people in the countryside didn't want us there because we came from the city and we were bringing the plague with us. And suddenly people I had known for years who I liked and who liked me were looking at me a little bit with the evil eye. And I had this sudden sense of, what if there was a real conflict between us? And what if there were checkpoints on Route 22? And what if it suddenly looked less like the United States and more like countries I've reported in years ago, Iraq, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire. What if it was that kind of situation? And that's the sort of thing that a journalist can't really do anything with, but a novelist can turn that into a story, into a book, and a story that maybe gets deeper than the facts, deeper than what you read every day, and tells you more like, what is it like to be alive today? What are the emotions? What are the dreams? What are the terrors of being alive today? And that's, I think, what novels can do more than journalism. And so I decided to write a novel.
Yeah, let's talk about how this novel is made, because I would think a journalist after 20 years for the first time writing fiction, maybe this would be a book in an I perspective. I, the journalist who will just write
Autofiction.
Autofiction, yeah. So I have to write fiction because reality is overwhelming. No, you did something completely different, very, very brave. You didn't even write realistic prose. You wrote an allegory.
Yeah.
Allegory. Sorry, I'm not a native
no,
English-speaking person, as you probably heard.
Sandra,
So,
you're the best. Don't worry about it.
And not in English, though. So you wrote an allegory about a divided society, as we just heard from you. So the city has no name. It's the city by the river. The countryside has no name. It's the empire. The old empire has just been collapsed, imploded. So the old world is gone, and now there is a new world trying to be built. And you have this, just before you, you have the, just that everyone can follow.
Yeah.
You have the burghers, that is the people who live in the town, Bürger, and you have the yeomen, the people outside. And they're totally different. And then you have the refugees, that's the third.
The strangers.
The strangers.
Yeah.
The strangers.
So maybe I should read the beginning,
yeah.
But I just wanted to say, walking around Zurich yesterday, I realized this is where I set my novel. There's a clock tower, there's a river, there's cobblestones, there's a tram. And of course it's Zurich, except it's Zurich maybe 100 years ago or something like that. So it's not the place is not named, the time is not named, but it has a feeling of something old. And I asked myself, why did I set it in Zurich 100 years ago?
And is that a good sign?
Yeah, without knowing. And I think it's because I wanted to create a sense of a very old place that had been there forever and that seemed like it would never change. And then suddenly it collapses. So America, you can't do that because things are changing all the time. But a city like this, you can imagine suddenly the cobblestones do not feel solid. Suddenly everything that was old and solid and reliable seems dangerous and loose. So I'll just read the first.
Yes, and since guilds play a part in your book, we went to the guild house yesterday.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's Zurich for sure. Looking back, Dr. Rustin realized that the emergency had been a long time coming. This was how empires of old that he had learned about in school fell, imperceptibly, then shockingly. Even with an enemy army gathering outside the walls, no one can believe that a way of life is about to end or imagine the strange new life that will replace it. Reports of an impasse at the top of government reach the provinces like word of some far-off, slow-moving threat, an outbreak of a new disease halfway around the world. The standoff dragged on for weeks, paralyzing imperial functions. But even news of street fighting in the capital between mobs armed with nail-studded clubs and iron bars made little impression on burghers in the city by the river amid the high drama of exams week. Selva, the older Rustin child, was sitting for her exam, and the family was much too distracted to notice that the empire was collapsing. And then, one day in late spring, a week after exam results were announced across the empire, the ruling elite fled the capital. In the city by the river, local officials abandoned their posts. Police disappeared from the streets. Communications across the region went down, and the Evening Verity newspaper never arrived. It was the start of the emergency. That night at dinner, sitting at the head of the table, Dr. Rustin informed his family of the situation. Annabelle gave her husband the satisfaction of bringing the news and pretended that she didn't already know. "We'll go about our normal lives," he said. "These things never last." "Is there going to be a war?" Pan, their 8-year-old son, asked. His father laughed. "Are you thinking of enlisting?" "What if they cancel the next round of exams?" Selva asked. "I've been working so hard." "And you've done so well," Rustin said. "Don't worry, just keep studying." "Are you sure this won't last, Hugo?" Annabelle asked. Rustin reached across the table for his wife's slender hand. "Doesn't everything turn out okay for us?" The next morning, he left for the Imperial College Hospital, as usual, not out of personal courage or civic duty, but because he was too rational to imagine all that could go wrong. The streets were nearly empty, and the tram wasn't running. The few people he met avoided eye contact. And as Rustin walked along the silent tracks, he suddenly understood in his central nervous system that only the threat of consequences from higher authority had allowed him to share a street or a tram without fear of violent death. And now anyone could do anything. All that mattered was whether this person approaching intended to kill him. So that's the opening part, and sets up a little bit about the story that follows.
Yes. So there is a new society that rises, and as we heard, there are no courts, there are no police, so there are no institutions that regulate society, but everything works about shame. So could you describe us a little bit this town society, how that works?
So the doctor and his family are the main story of the novel. It's a family novel as well as a political allegory. His daughter Selva, who's 14, once everything collapses and her exams no longer matter, she has a kind of personal epiphany, and she joins this new movement in the city of young people. So there's a real split between the old and the young. The doctor and his daughter, who've always been close, suddenly are going in totally opposite directions. He doesn't like what's happening. What he sees is a kind of self-organization where people join committees to take over the running of the water system or the schools. His daughter gets involved in this. It's really being run by young people, including what are called the excess burgers, who are the young people who have failed their exams and have been essentially cast out. Well, now they're coming back in order to be part of this new movement called Together. So it's the doctor and his daughter see it in totally different ways, and much of the story is about his attempt to understand her and to hold on to her without abandoning everything he's always known and always valued and cared about. So what is it about shame? Well, if there's no police, if there's no jails, what is it that keeps people in line? And in this new society, it's shame in the eyes of your neighbor. It's the sense that you've become a bad person, that at the hospital where Rustin is the chief surgeon, he's suddenly no longer an authority figure with experience and expertise. Instead, he's kind of considered someone who isn't with the program. And at one point early in the novel, he commits a kind of crime against the spirit of Together, and he's cast out. He knows that he could come back if he wanted, but he knows no one will look at him. And he discovers that shame and being cast out of society is more powerful than the police could ever be, because you need this connection to your community and to your daughter and your family. And once that's gone, you really do feel as if your whole person has been annihilated. And so he goes through this with his daughter, with his hospital, with the city. And at the end of part one, he decides he's going to leave the city and go out into the countryside on a particular kind of mission. And that was the original notion I had of this man who leaves the city and goes out into the wild world of the yeomen, the farmers.
Yes, this Hugo leaves town because he has lost everything, the respect of his daughter, his job, being a famous person in his city. So he's a naked man, more or less, and he goes out to find something, of course, to find mostly himself and his new, where he's wrong, to find out where he's wrong and maybe where they are wrong. The interesting thing is you don't judge as an author. At least I didn't see it. So
and his daughter goes with him. That's the key to the story.
Yes.
At the last moment, she says, "I'm coming with you," and she goes with him out. And so their relationship continues.
We enter the Trump country, I would say, maybe.
Trump country.
And I read.
Just outside the walls of Zurich, that's where the Trump voters are, right?
Well, the yeomen, as you describe them, they're vulgar, they're very violent, they don't believe in...
They're resentful, I would say. They resent the burghers. They feel looked down on by the burghers.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. I read somewhere that you were inspired by your neighbor somewhere in the countryside in New York. Is that a myth or...?
So we have a house in farm country 2 or 3 hours north of New York City, and we have a neighbor who's been there forever. That's his land, it's his country, and I have a very good relationship with him because I have to, because he lives there and I don't, and we're surrounded by him. But the one time we had a real political conversation, it was a total disaster, and I'll never repeat that mistake, but it did in some way make its way into the novel.
Into this one moment where Hugo Rustin is talking to
the farmer, Big Crunk.
Yes.
Big Crunk, and realizes we don't see the world the same way at all. But we still have to somehow work together or have some understanding between us. And that's a crucial theme, is how do you continue to live with people and to try to understand them when you really disapprove or disagree, and even disagree about basic facts about what day of the week it is. How do you have a relationship? And yet you can't let it go completely, because if you do, the outcome is almost always violence. Mm-hmm. The other way of understanding each other is trying to kill each other. And that's, this very rational doctor is out in the countryside, and it seems as if everywhere he looks, violence is beginning to rise up, and his rational world, his liberal humanist world, doesn't seem to have an answer for the feelings of the yeoman out in the countryside, or for his daughter. And so she's continually challenging him while they're on this journey.
I don't want to spoiler everything of the novel, because of course you all have to buy a book outside and he will be signing it later. But there's this one thing I have to tell about the Shitterpult. Do I say it correctly? Shitterpult?
Shitterpult.
Shitterpult, also catapult. And this catapult is throwing, by the human, is throwing, the excrements. And he was writing, you were writing this like 2 years ago. You had this picture of these people throwing excrement
over the city walls.
Over the city.
Yeah.
And now you remember, do you remember the picture? We saw that like 5 months ago. What was that to be an author who is obviously so much into the Trump thinking that you
I had
you
no
had
idea.
this image before Trump made this incredibly...
I had no idea how deep I had gone into that man's psyche. It was a shock. First of all, it's hard to be shocked any longer in my country, but it still was sort of shocking that the President of the United States released a video of himself dumping a giant load of human excrement on protesters below. Have you all seen this video? No? Yes? Don't look for it. It's just, yeah. It's an AI Trump on a fighter plane, or a bomber plane, I guess, piloting this plane like Tom Cruise, and then releasing a lever, and it all goes down. So months earlier, I had written, toward the end of the novel, this weapon that the yeomen have developed because their hatred of the burghers has reached a point where they really want to bring everyone down to the lowest level. And I was thinking, what is the lowest level? And this was coming also from reading the news every day. Who's going to be our next Secretary of Defense, Attorney General? It was as low as you could go. It felt as if we were being trolled by President-elect Trump after his second election. What would be the lowest you could go? Well, to cover people with shit. And it felt like he was doing that to the country. And so I came up with this shitapult weapon. And then months later, I hear about the, I'm starting to get texts from friends. Did you see this AI video? It's just like, you know, the end of your novel. And I saw it and thought, this is what fiction allows you to do. You have this intuition based on imagination, on a feeling. You realize it in words. You make it a real thing in the story. You describe it. In fact, you use the most vivid language you can to make it real because it's so unreal. And then suddenly it's there, coming out of the White House, as if my imagination and Trump's had converged on each other and become one.
And your publisher was not, he was suggesting to keep it out because it was...
Yeah, my editor was a little uneasy with the shitapult. Maybe that's going too far. Come on, isn't that just a bit extreme? And maybe not, but... Yeah.
Interesting thing about you is that you are an author with not easy answers. So, as I said already, you don't take sides. So it's easy to criticize the yeoman. But there were leftists in America who criticized you, that you criticized the left, that you criticize cancel
Well, you're not
culture.
allowed to criticize the left, you know.
I know.
You can...
That's what. Why
Right.
did you do it? Why did you see that coming? And I
With
mean,
the
that
no-
is your
with the novel, you
well,
mean?
that your own bubble would be criticizing you for criticizing your own bubble.
I mean, that's happened to me for years.
Yes.
So, I mean, look, I always have thought of myself as a liberal leftist, social democrat. I would fit in very well with a European Social Democratic Party. We don't have that in the United States, so I'm a Democrat. But in the last 10 years, I've seen the left, especially the younger left, go in a direction that I don't think of as liberal. I think of it as illiberal, as coercive, anti-freedom, anti-individualist, anti-egalitarian, all the things that for me are what liberal politics should be about. The Enlightenment itself, it's gone in the other direction until it feels as if the left and the right have come to resemble each other in the US at the extremes, especially online, on the internet, social media. They want to cancel people, they want to suppress what people are saying, they demonize, they can't see any nuances or complexities in policy debates. It's all one thing or the other. So all of this sort of boring. It's been going on for a long time. I've criticized it. I've been criticized for criticizing it. And then years later, I hear the same people who criticized me for criticizing it, now they're criticizing it. But they've forgotten that a few years ago they were criticizing. I was a premature anti-woke, you know, like now it's common to be anti-woke, but I was a little too early, and that was the problem, like the premature anti-fascists of the 30s. So that's politics, and it's not, But the novel has some of that, because certainly what's happening in the city with the young in my novel has something to do with this rising anger at the old, and this sense that the old have failed them, and that the old liberal order has not given them either a good life or a meaningful life. That's a very common feeling, and I actually have a lot of sympathy for it. I have young children, well, not young, teenagers myself, and I see the world that they're getting, and I think, how did we do this? How did we mess this up so badly?
And how? What's your answer? You say, at one point in your book, you say people didn't care enough for what we have.
It's as if our values were not really that valuable to us, as if the things we claim to value had become slogans, phrases. We weren't really living them. We weren't making sure they were real for others, and not just for our children, but for others in society, including people who don't live in the cities. There is this massive divide in America between the cities and the rural areas. And it's true, I'm sure, in most European countries now, too. And that is both a divide in living standards, in connections to the world, and in politics and education. So that's like there are two fundamental divides in the novel. One is the generational divide between parents and children. The other is the social divide between the city and the countryside. And yeah, Dr. Rustin, over the course of the novel, begins to question how it is that he had been living in this seemingly permanent empire without realizing that it was no longer living for people. It was no longer giving them something. And at one point I say it died of boredom and loss of faith. The empire doesn't collapse because of an invasion or a plague or a revolution or a famine or an earthquake, the way empires in history have collapsed, but it's just a kind of gradual loss of belief among the people that it was supposed to be giving a meaning to. So I think there's some truth for all of us in that.
The third group in this novel are the strangers, the people, the poorest people who are below every.
Well, they're sort of outside the social order.
Yeah. Okay.
They're physically they're on the far side of the mountains. They're not really in the empire. They don't speak the language of the empire. They're semi-nomadic people. When the empire collapses, the border guards leave their posts, and suddenly the strangers begin to come into the empire and into the city by the river, and that is sort of what catalyzes the plot and the journey into the countryside.
Yes, that's why Hugo Rustin is going to the yeoman country to save one's
save
son,
a stranger boy, exactly.
a stranger's boy. Yeah. Now, as I said, you are unbequem as an author. You are not, you are. Does anybody knows the word unbequem? Anyways, no, uncomfortable. Is that the word? Danke, Frau Brunn. Troubling. You.
Disquieting.
Disquiet.
That's a good
she's
word.
She's a professor from NYU and Zurich.
That
both.
sounds like the perfect translation. Yeah.
Because this Mr. Mong, this stranger, you describe him as he's a victim. He lost everything. He lost his home. He lost his wife. He lost his son. He lost his wealth. He's a refugee. But you describe him as a person who is incredibly enough not a sympathy guy.
He's not a perfect human being.
A nightmare, this man. He is annoying everyone. He wants more and more and more. So you come up and describe a victim as an annoying person.
Yeah, how can I do that?
Yes.
Well, it just so happens he's a human being. The strangers are an important part of the story, and he's a stranger man who has, with others, come into the city by the river, and he gets to know the doctor and his family. But yes, he keeps pressing for more. And I have different feelings about him because, yes, he's annoying, but why shouldn't he press for more? He's lost everything. And they think he should be happy with what they're giving him because they're being very generous and very humanitarian. And he's like, but I wanted to get a job like my old one. I don't want to be a gardener. Why should I be a gardener? And it's important not to sentimentalize victims. Victims are not always made better by their victimhood. In fact, being a victim can be a really degrading experience, so that you don't rise to the sainthood that people expect of you. The young burghers in the city, including Selva, the daughter, thinks of the strangers as these saints who've come to show us how to live. Well, no, they're desperate people who've lost everything. The yeomen see the strangers as threats who are coming across their farms and their land and maybe are going to take it somehow. And they're not that either. They're human. And it's important as a writer not to turn them into caricatures of one thing or another. But one thing that Mr. Monge has done is he's abandoned his son out in the countryside in the yeoman land while he was coming into the city. And when the doctor hears this, he has this impulse to go out and find this boy, because this theme of parents and children and the divide between them is there in all three groups: burghers, yeomen, strangers. And in a way, he wants to redeem himself in the eyes of his family and his hospital by going out, finding this boy who's been left in the woods, injured, wounded, treat him, take care of him, and bring him back to the city. And it's a kind of fantasy of redemption. Mm-hmm. And Selva, the daughter, as I said, decides she wants to be part of that. So she goes with her father, even though they're arguing most of the time. So a father abandons his son. Parents feel they're losing their children. They don't understand each other. This is, I mean, it's a universal generational experience. And it's,
and you have this generational conflict at the yeoman family as well, at this farmer you were talking about. He has a son as well, and he is estranged.
Because exactly in the countryside, there's also a youth rebellion going on. The old traditions of the farm are no longer satisfying to the young in yeoman land after the collapse of the empire. And what they turn to is not this kind of utopian together, but something closer to fascism, to physical strength, male strength, dominance, training the body for some war. We don't quite know what. And that's what the young farm boy who knows Selva, they've met each other in the past. He's suddenly become the boss of his family farm, and his parents are living in fear of him. A total reversal of the way things had been. And he's got these boys on his farm, his age, teenagers, training for some military conflict. And that's what Selva and her father run into when they go out into the countryside. And again, Rustin's narrow humanistic framework is exploded by what he sees on this farm. Mm-hmm. And he has to try to make sense of it and survive it. Now we've given away about half the story. There's still a lot left. And
I missed something.
Yeah, it's a...
George, I missed something.
Okay.
So the novel has 4 chapters. You have 3 perspectives to show the difference. You have the humanist Dr. Rusty, whose world has been vanished. So he's depressed. You have his daughter, Selva, who is part of the new movement.
Yeah.
She will find out some mistakes as well. So that's very interesting that you have these 2 perspectives who don't see the 2 people don't see the same world. And then you have Annabelle, Hugo's wife. But you don't have a perspective of the yeoman.
Right.
Why not? As a reader, I was thinking, That would be
Yeah.
a challenge.
Yeah, I think it would have been a bridge too far. It was enough for me to imagine the perspective of a 14-year-old girl, which I've never been, although I have one. And to keep moving between points of view, there's certain novels that have 20 points of view, and you just keep moving between characters, and maybe each chapter is a new person until you reach 20. That's not this novel. It's a very focused story on this family and this journey. And I think if you shift point of view too radically, and it's not in the first person, by the way. These are all third person point of view, which is important. It's close third person, but it's traditional. It's a traditional form. Mm-hmm. If I try to go into the yeoman point of view, Tolstoy for about a paragraph has the point of view of the dog on the hunt in the long hunting scene in War and Peace. That's Tolstoy. He does it. I'm not Tolstoy. I think the whole thing would have started to fall apart if I had tried to go that far. I was keeping it under control with this family, the doctor, his daughter, his wife. And that was pushing the limit, I think, of my novelistic abilities. So, but it's a great idea. And every time you ask me, I think, damn, maybe I should have tried that.
I think it is a very dark novel, and it is a very dark ending. I'm not telling what the end is, but it's very dark. How pessimistic are you about this divided society you describe in your allegory?
Well, look, Sandra, I don't think it's quite all that dark. All right, give me the book again. I'm going to read, this will not spoil anything, but I'm going to read the last paragraph. And the last paragraph gives you, in any novel, the feeling that you then, of course the whole novel is taking you to it, but it sort of puts you in a resting place, if you know what I mean. And so we're back after this long journey in the Rustin house. And there's a lot going on outside. Think about what we've been talking about with weapons of war, etc. It was a long night. At one point, the shouting outside grew so close to the house that everyone stopped what they were doing and fell silent. Then came a gunshot. The only conceivable weapons were Rustin's garden tools in the backyard shed. He was kneeling by the armchair, holding a hemostat. Annabelle had just come in from the kitchen, where she was boiling water for tea. Their eyes met, and they waited for more shots. None came. The shouting died away. There was another knock at the door. They went on looking at each other, and his long acquaintance with her face allowed him to imagine her thoughts. Something was ending, and they were too old to understand. What came after would belong to their children, but they would go on opening the door, and in this way, they would live. That's not totally pessimistic.
That is, yeah, okay. This is like 10 lines or 15 lines. And I read 400 pages of darkness.
You want to talk about Trump, I can tell. Let's just go there.
We will, in a few minutes, we will open the discussion to the audience, so I'm sure we will have a political discussion afterwards. Just let me get 2 questions on the novel. We don't have any signs of signature of our present days. There are no cell phones, there are no computers. But then there is this kind of laboratory where they have these second human...
Better humans.
Better humans,
yeah.
Yes. So this is my better I. So this is like one of the darkest moments in this book. This is like the Silicon Valley wet dream, as I read it. Do I read it correct?
Is there a warehouse district in Zurich?
Probably
So
not.
in this city, there's a market district, there's a warehouse district. Again, it's Zurich. I'm just realizing it as I come here. So in the warehouse district, there's a warehouse, and the doctor is walking past it, and he sees inside the warehouse the bodies of young people all across the floor, like 100 of them, lying there face up, seemingly dead. And it's a shock, even though he's very familiar with death as a doctor, it's a shock to see all these bodies. And they're dressed in colorful clothes, and their eyes are all open. And he begins to realize these are actually not real human bodies. These are not really the young of the city. These are replicas of the young of the city with clay faces and metallic bodies with wires and gears and levers, and they are being trained by a sort of mad Silicon Valley type scientist to speak and to be the perfect image of the young person that they've been modeled on. And the young are going to this warehouse to have their words recorded and to be turned into what in the workshop is called better humans. So it's pre-digital, there's no computers, but it's kind of like, if you've ever seen pictures of late 19th century robots, steampunk is the style that was sort of modeled after this. That's what they look like. And they are a pre-digital version of AI. And what's important isn't the technology. I'm not really interested in technology, and the book is not interested in technology. What's important is, what does this represent? Where is it coming from? And it's coming from, as the mad scientist tells the doctor, the unhappiness of these young people who found that the world couldn't give them what they wanted. And so instead, they're going to create a version of themselves that is happy and that can kind of reach perfection. And to me, what is AI? Well, it's lots of things. It's just the continuation of the digital revolution. It's also, I think, a reflection of an exhaustion with being human. It's just too damn much trouble. It's too painful. You attach yourself to someone and then you lose them. Well, why don't we do it through machines? Let the machines do it for us. Let them speak for us. Let them tell us what to think, how to live. It takes all the responsibility off of us, the freedom that's so terrifying, and the pain. And instead, it's a kind of perfect, frictionless world. This, I know, you could say this is a dark vision, or it's just a kind of, let's see what's really happening. And I fear that the AI revolution represents some kind of, as social media did before it, a desire to be rid of the trouble of being human. So that's a big theme of the novel and the purpose of this scene in this warehouse. You know? Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm saying anything that makes sense, but
Yes,
this
it
is
does.
my, why are we obsessed with AI? Well, because it does all these incredible things. It's like a toy, an amazing new toy. But beneath it, I have this sense of the erasing of our human face.
Before we are diving into American politics, one last literary question, which is a dark moment too, I have to admit. You have this suicidal point in your novel.
Yes, the suicide spot.
Spot.
Yep.
That's a place where young people go to kill themselves, but not to kill themselves because they're talked into survival. What is that?
So one day I was walking through Washington Square in Manhattan, and on the pavement I saw someone had spray painted suicide spot. And I thought, what the hell is that? Is that an encouragement? Is this like the location where you go? But at the time I was deep into the novel and in this state of mind, which is the state of mind you really have to get into, where everything takes you back into the story you're writing and finds a way into it. And the strangest things, the weirdest things are the best. And so when I saw that, I had this shiver of that's in the novel. How is it in the novel? What is the suicide spot? I began to fantasize, to imagine in the market district, the young of the city have built a gallows. I don't know if that English word has a German translation that'll make it. Okay. A real gallows, very high, with a trap door and a rope and a noose. And very publicly, the young go to the suicide spot, climb the gallows, put the noose around their neck. There's a crowd standing around them, encouraging them, not to kill themselves, but encouraging them to talk. And there's two peers, two teenagers on either side. One of them has her hand on the lever for the trap door. And it's like, tell me when to do it, but let's talk. And the young person with the noose starts talking. And what do you want to say to your parents? The young person starts talking to her or his parents, saying all the things that have gone wrong. The empire is collapsed. You've left us to start over. You've abandoned us. And it's a sort of cri de coeur and also a kind of public therapy. That's how I imagine it. It's like public therapy, but really therapy, with everything on the line, because there's a noose around the neck. And in every case, they talk it through until they don't need the noose, and they take it off, and everyone gives a huge cheer. And so it's a kind of like public celebration of these young people. And one day, Rustin, who's now been kicked out of the hospital, is following Selva. She doesn't know it. He's following her through the city to find out, what is this new life of hers? What is she doing? And they end up at the suicide spot. And she's up on the gallows with the noose around her neck. And so her father, absolutely terrified. But she begins talking. She doesn't know he's there, but she's talking to him, telling him what he's done, what he hasn't done. You never believed that the world could be better or worse than the one you gave me, she says. And that breaks my heart. And he has this mixed reaction of, not true, not true, I've tried to give you, but he also is so proud because she's unbelievably articulate. And the people around him are saying, oh, this one's really good. And he wants to turn to them and say, that's my girl up there, with the noose around her neck. So the whole scene is this mix of parental pride, even narcissism, with terror and also guilt. And it's the relationship between them is all there in that image. So anyway, I think we've given away too much.
It's a wonderful book.
Yeah.
And we only talked about some few moments. So it's still worth reading. But I would like to give you the opportunity to ask some questions. I'm sure you have questions. Yes, please.
You sounded a bit optimistic about where the United States, a bit pessimistic about where the United States was heading. But don't you see it as a good sign that on Friday the Supreme Court put a brake on Trump's tariffs? So maybe the American institutions are holding to a certain extent. Even two of his appointees voted against him.
Yeah, that's true. It was a very big moment. Because I had lost faith in the Supreme Court. I had assumed it was going the same way as all the other institutions in the past year. We've watched them go one after another and essentially abandon their democratic role, whether it's Congress, the Justice Department, even the law firms and the universities and corporations. So suddenly these justices found their courage. Trump already is saying it doesn't matter. I'm the president. I'll do what I want. I guess the Swiss tariffs were like 39% because he doesn't like your prime minister. And now they're 15%. So maybe you will be the beneficiaries of this Supreme Court decision. I don't know. The economics of it, I'm not an economist. It's not what I focus on. But the politics of it are interesting because, yes, it seems as if after a year of authoritarianism and of destroying institutions and destroying democracy, Trump has lost enough support that the Supreme Court has the confidence to go against him. It's a political decision. The Supreme Court has long since lost its real legal justification. So many decisions that make no sense, given what they claim to be their philosophy. But the politics right now are against Trump, and so the court has shifted against him as well. That's how I see it. Not on the merits, because I don't think the merits really... If Justice Roberts were here, he'd be shaking his head and wagging a finger at me. But I think it's the politics have shifted, and that's why it's an encouraging sign. It shows that the institutions, as you say, are finding themselves again, maybe a little bit. But it's a long battle. It's not one Supreme Court decision.
Yes, please, in the back.
One of the main themes of this book is like young and old. And my question is, I don't want to call you old, but as a author who is not...
It's not news to me.
who is not 15...
Every morning my back tells me you're old.
who is not 15 or 20, when you write about young people or this society, how do you do it without thinking about how you wish them to be? Or is there influence from your youth? Do you understand?
I totally understand. Thanks. Good question. I mean, I remember, and in fact, sometimes I do still think I'm young until I look in the mirror. I think, you know, nothing has really changed in here since I was about 12, so I still must look young, and then I'm shocked by the fact that I don't. But I also have children, and one thing that having children, at least for me, has done is to force me to pay really careful attention to people other than myself. And most of us go through at least the earlier part of our lives in a fairly deep state of self-reflection. There's this constant internal drama going on. And the children come and you just don't have time for it. You just are focused on them. And I've been focused on them now for 18 years. And it's been good for me as a writer. It's, you know, harder to find time to write, but I think I'm a better writer because I have to pay attention to them and to really try to understand the world from their point of view, to see what it's like to be 4, to be 9, to be 14. So my son has read the book, my daughter hasn't. She claims that she's afraid of seeing herself too much in Selva and doesn't want to see how I see her. And I've told her, you're not Selva, don't worry about it, but she doesn't believe me. My son says, you know, I got at some things that he was surprised because at the dinner table, we argue. And we don't see the world the same way, even though I have to try to understand his argument, which helps me to see the world from his eyes. I'm still myself. I'm not going to abandon everything I believe just because my children are in a different world. I want to give them something. This is the drama that Rustin is going through. How can I understand and stay close to her without abandoning everything I believe, which I still think has value, some value? Is how do I give it to her still? Well, that's, for me, a huge question. And so at the dinner table, we're we're arguing because I want him to understand why I see things a certain way. But in the novel, when I'm in Selva's point of view, I'm not arguing with Selva. I'm arguing with the doctor. And it's a great joy for me to get out of my own point of view. If I'm the doctor, I want to get rid of it after a while. I've had enough of that. I've been in that for 65 years. Let me try someone else's point of view and see how that is. And then the world looks different. And you follow the emotion, the intuition, once you start creating a new character, and it takes you in directions you never expected. And that's the incredible privilege of fiction, is to be able to do that. And that's why I needed a novel. I couldn't write about this relationship with children in nonfiction. I didn't know how to do that, but I could do it, through fiction. So, does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes.
Why do you think wokeness is a problem? You could also argue it's a form of enlightenment, because you mentioned enlightenment as the old humanistic point of view. First question. Second question, why, or linked to that, couldn't you imagine that the countryside could also be woke?
Well, we actually do have a kind of rural right-wing wokeness in America, and they've learned a lot from the left to claim that words are violence, that anyone who celebrates or even isn't completely supportive of Charlie Kirk after his assassination needs to be canceled, destroyed. That's the mirror image of what the left had been doing with people they disagreed with or disliked. Why is wokeness a problem? Because it is not the Enlightenment. It is closer to a system or an ideology that sees, first of all, it's a problem for several reasons. Philosophically, morally, and politically. Philosophically, it sees us as entirely members of groups, defined by that, and in a hierarchy of oppression. So yes, there is that in life. Is that all we are? If you really assume that, you're going to fail to understand people's behavior. And wokeness has totally failed to understand the behavior of other people in America. Why did Trump get 50% of the Latino vote if the woke worldview is accurate? Because people are more than just members of a group, an identity group. Wokeness is all about reducing people to identity groups and reducing identity groups to a hierarchy. The hierarchy itself is coercive because there's a different moral standard depending on where you are, a different judgment of behavior, a different judgment of where society should put you. If you're only a member of a group, then we only look at social progress on the basis of groups, which is one way, but there are other ways that we have to as well. And morally, it is coercive. It shames. It draws its power from a kind of manipulation of language and of reality to make people feel as if they are not seeing what they're seeing. Because if you're saying the wrong thing, then you are seeing the world in the wrong way, even if the facts are staring you in the face. And politically, it's a problem because it's failed. It's completely failed. The Democratic Party is so unpopular despite Trump's unpopularity, largely because most Americans don't feel it really cares about them. Why doesn't it care about them? Because it's obsessed with language, pronouns, with the grievances of groups whom themselves may not even feel those grievances. So much of it is educated people telling the disadvantaged how to feel. and not bothering to understand them? And what has it changed? What reforms have we seen? How has it made society better? It seems entirely to exist in the realm of language and the professional classes, their jobs, their hiring, their publications. It's become an elite ideology that benefits certain elites. It has not changed life materially for people lower down on the scale. So if that's not enough reason to find woke a problem, then I could probably come up with some more. But by the way, it's not a word I use, never in the novel, and really never in my journalism, because it's become a kind of sloppy pejorative. I would rather talk about the ideology and the politics of it the way I've just been doing, rather than using the word woke.
In the back was another question. Yeah.
I have a question which is not political at all, about the creative process, about how the book came to be, whether you'd be prepared to share a little bit about that, and whether your journalistic background helped or got in the way of that.
That's a wonderful question. It could have gotten in the way if I were writing a novel that was too close to life, if it was set in Washington, D.C., if there was a Trump-like president with a Congress, with elections, then I would have gotten closer and closer until I'm essentially doing journalism. And it becomes less and less of a novel and really less and less good. And one reason I wanted to write a fable or an allegory was to avoid that trap and to get also out of exhaustion as a journalist. I was exhausted. I didn't want to live in that world for a while. So to get away from it, to create something totally unfamiliar with no familiar signposts, landmarks, names, is also a way, I think, of opening your eyes again to the way we are living. You see it fresh by seeing it strange. You have a sense of its clarity, its meaning, its strongest qualities by not being numbed by the familiar words, the familiar arguments. Instead, you're sort of refreshed, revitalized. And that's why I read fiction, just to get far away in order to get deeper, I guess I would say. And it also stylistically turned out to be a great advantage because I was building a world from nothing. And the building of that world, it almost did feel like a construction project. I used to work in construction, and it felt like a construction project. And my wife tells me that whenever I'm working on a book, my dreams are all about a house and some impossible renovation that I've gotten involved in where there's too many rooms and it's all starting to fall apart. That's the sign that, okay, there's some book being written here. And this did feel like a construction project, but each of the rooms we've been describing gave me this energy, this confidence that I could keep building. Normally with journalism, the confidence comes from the actual fact. I've got a notebook full of quotes. I've got a transcript. I've got research. All of that gives me the confidence that the story I'm telling has some weight. It has some significance because it's coming out of life from what I've heard from the people I've interviewed. The confidence comes from seeing this world begin to rise up out of nothing. Yeah, so does that, yeah, that's why.
Do you have a hope, a vision of a new possible common ground on which a modern society like yours or ours could be built?
You know, in some ways it's not a political novel in that it doesn't have an agenda that you could follow. It doesn't lay out a way to rebuild. But the passage I read at the end is more like an image or an impulse of what we could rebuild with. And it's very simple. It's someone knocks on the door, they need help, you let them in. It's a very elementary morality, I would say, a return to something basic in human decency, which we've lost. We've had a total moral collapse in the United States. When it starts at the top, it sort of begins to spread downward because people feel licensed, freed up to give in to the worst of themselves. And so rather than a political program, what I feel, even not as a novelist, but as a citizen, is we need to remoralize ourselves. How do we do that? Well, it may begin in very simple ways. And then it becomes the basis for, yeah, maybe a new society.
So
maybe a better one.
personally, you do have some hope left.
I have to. I mean, as I said, I have children. Anyone with children can't absolutely abandon hope. Maybe even people without children can't abandon hope because there's the future. So no, I'm not hopeless. I'm not hopeless. But we have to be clear. You know, we can't pretend. We can't say, oh, well, it's going to turn around with the midterms. It's much deeper than that, what's happened in America and in some European countries and around the world. It's much deeper. It's a real loss of belief in our own ability to govern ourselves, to be free, to be together in a democracy. And instead, we're with enemies in this democracy. How do you get past that? I mean, there's lots of, we could be talking to each other in different ways. We could get off social media, instead have personal conversations. I'm all for that. I think social media is pretty toxic. All the incentives, the algorithms are turning us into worse versions of ourselves than we really are. And then you meet the person in the flesh and think, this guy isn't such an asshole after all. I thought he was a complete asshole. So there are ways, formats, you know, I sometimes think as if we were Bosnia, we need some international groups to come to the United States and take different communities and put them together to build a school or to put on a play. And at the beginning, they hate each other because they're from the red and the blue teams. And by the end, they've kind of learned how to put on the play together or build the school together. That's where we are. So if there's any Swiss organizations that want to try that, yeah. Yes.
Yes, please.
I was wondering how your novel was received in the US. Is there any indication that you have, in fact, reached a broader or more diverse readership?
No, honestly, it's probably, it's reached maybe a different readership from my journalism. I would say not quite as many. Fiction is, in the US and maybe here, it's becoming a little more like classical music. It's a bit of a niche passion that has fewer real followers. People want nonfiction. They want facts. Except they want their own facts. They want the latest news. They want the latest Substack post. We're inundated with media, but fiction requires a kind of patience and quiet and attention span that everything in the digital world is making harder and harder. I mean, I know I have a harder time getting through a long novel than I used to. And I think most people, if they're honest, would say they are. So it's a harder audience. But what's gratifying is conversations like this are really, we're talking about real things. And so in the public life that the novel has had, we also don't really have book reviews anymore in the United States, which is a problem for a book. But we have podcasts, so I've gone on all the podcasts in order. It's the new version of a book review. And it's a new kind of conversation for me because we're talking the way we're talking today, and I think we're getting at things that we don't get at when we're just talking about the latest Trump atrocity. So, and it's also, I don't have this, I used to, every writer wants to be on the bestseller list. I have been in the past. This is not. And it's okay because it's getting into the hands of people who I would think of as like the people who can read it, who can understand it, who can respond to it. And that, it's a more modest ambition, but maybe more rewarding in some way. This man has had his hand up for a long time.
Thank you. No, thank you very much for this really amazing discussion and how eloquently you describe the situation. For us, or for me also, I think obviously I lost all my confidence in all the beliefs that we had. We were educated in Germany or in Switzerland on a very high level, thinking it will never happen again. And we see the rise in Germany of the AfD, and we kind of suddenly think perhaps it can happen again, despite all the books I read, despite all the information we got, and all the insights of people, and we kind of read Brecht and Anna Arendt and all of them. And then we always thought, or I always thought, well, the states, they are different. This is this naive liberal country or so, that can never happen there. We kind of saw that Reagan and Bush, and it was bad enough, but we made our jokes, and it showed that when there was Obama, who was even elected. And what did we do wrong as intellectuals? What can we do? Again, we are sitting here in this nice bubble. It's a beautiful bubble. And and that's my question, why do the right tunnel or canalize these frustrations, these anxieties perhaps, and this loss of better than all the left and all our intellectual abilities that we have?
Wow. What can I say? I mean, I'm going to give my answer, but I would like someone here to, maybe you, to answer as well, because I want to learn from you, and you have your own European point of view, but I've felt for a long time that with Trump, the U.S. is not leaving the world. We're getting closer to the world. We're becoming more like a normal European or even non-European country with a strong man, with nationalism, blood and soil, with socialism, which we now have in New York, where I live. At least we have a socialist mayor. All of that means our politics are really widening into the politics that your history is full of, for better or worse. How did it happen this time around? Well, how did it happen the last time around? I mean, complacency. And when I think of the years from the 90s until 2016, you can't overstate how complacent and self-satisfied people at the top of our society were. There was a sense that they were just going to keep getting richer and richer from globalization, from the stock market. They were going to have, more and more of their life was going to be connected to the world and in a way that made them happy, and they didn't have to see anything. Even though if you drive 20 miles outside of any American city, you're very quickly in some kind of deindustrialized or rural area where obviously things are not going well. But you can just sort of drive through it and not look to the next glittering destination. And I think too many people with educations and good jobs and good incomes and investments didn't look, and were focused on their children getting to the same place. Like it became almost an aristocracy of education. My class, the consuming passion is to get your children into the right schools so that they can have the good life that you have. Total obsession. Well, what does that say about your role as a citizen of this larger society? So I could and I have blamed the elites for a long time. I've been criticized by some of the elites for blaming the elites. But then we have to also blame the public, who have decided that none of it really matters that much, and will vote for this guy and vote again and watch these these institutions be burned down because it's satisfying, because the elites are taking it on the face for once. You know, well, there's a nihilism in that. And then it becomes sort of contagious, because if everyone's standard is falling and if everyone's getting away with it, why should I be the last sucker in the country to be following the rules and trying to speak for some higher value? Like, that was Obama. He was the last sucker saying, we should all be higher than that. We should all speak better. We should all think better. We should cherish our democracy. Those beautiful speeches. And then Trump came along and basically said, sucker, watch this. And it seemed as if that was the way you got power and you became richer and more famous. So I'm not saying that's a good path. I'm saying that's a path that you could say the elites failed and the people failed. Who did it first? Why? Very complicated. You can point to lots of big historic changes, whether it's the deindustrialization, the knowledge economy, which really did create vast gaps between the winners and the losers, much more than in the old industrial economy post-war, which is true all across Europe as well as in the US. You could say mass immigration, which gave lots of people the sense that they were being crowded out, left behind. Other people were coming in and changing the culture and taking the jobs. You could point to technological change, especially social media, which really did turn public discourse into toxicity. You could point to cultural changes. All of those are true. But I think in the end, it's because people decided it didn't matter that much, that we could get rid of it and it wouldn't matter, that this thing we've had for 250 years hasn't really worked, so let's just burn it down. And that's, yeah, that's a bad place to have to start from again, but that's where we are.
What about the state of journalism in the United States?
Yeah.
I've been a journalist in the United States for a long time. I covered elections in there since...
I recognize you. I know we've met in the past.
Yeah, and what I noticed is that, you know, you talked about facts. I wonder whether it's not that people are more interested in activism and ideology. I was just wondering, what's the state of journalism in the United States?
Well... Okay, now we're really going to get dark. I mean, the real answer is the internet has slowly, now not so slowly, undermined the financial basis for good journalism, which is basically reporting, writing in a way that gets beyond quick takes, opinions, the day's hot, news. And no one has found a way to make it work in the internet age. I mean, The Atlantic is actually doing well because it has, first of all, had good investments and then has stuck with its own principles, and those have worked. But then you look around, there should be 5 Atlantics, there should be 10. The New York Times is doing well because there's a family that believes in it and has put in a lot of money, and it's keeps growing, and it is adapted well to the digital age. There should be 5 or 10 New York Times. There used to be a Washington Post. That doesn't really exist any longer. There's a Wall Street Journal that's actually quite a good newspaper. So it's shrunk. In the rest of the country, it's disappeared. We've had this immense extinction of newspapers around the smaller cities and regional areas. And instead, we're all online, and there's this kind of compulsive candy eating, which is, I'm going to read what's on Twitter, I'm going to read what's on Substack. It's too hard to read the 10,000-word piece, in the New York Times or the Atlantic or wherever. So journalism has suffered from, the technological and financial collapse, and it has sort of lost faith in itself. When all these news organizations gave everything to Google for free because they were told, if you're not on Google, no one will read you. the print edition is going to die in a couple of years anyway. So they panicked and said, okay, let's give it all to Google. And ever since then, they've been trying to get it back, but people came to expect it to be free. Oh, I've hit the paywall. I can't read that article. Well, actually, if you care about democracy, which means caring about journalism, you should pay for it. But it's become a kind of given that it's all free. Well, how could it be free? Someone had to do the work. So that there too, you can blame our public and our elites, who I think lost faith in what they were doing as journalists and became, you know, to make it, they had to become a talking head on CNN or a big personality on Twitter and sort of lost focus on what journalism should be. Now, that's certainly not everyone, and I could name, you know, 50 colleagues who are doing great work, and there are many more who I can't even think to name. So the persistence is heartening. People are still doing good work. They're just doing it in really difficult circumstances where getting readers and keeping subscribers is harder and harder. You still read a newspaper here, right? I mean, I see the newspaper. It's like, oh, there's a horse and buggy going down the street. That's so beautiful. We don't read the newspaper. Now, Jeff Bezos would say, who cares? Why do you have to kill trees in order to read? Well, because, first of all, the financial basis was in that print paper. And second, because there's something about reading a print paper like Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung that gives you what the editors think is the important stories of the day. Whereas if you're getting it through Facebook, you're getting what Mark Zuckerberg thinks he can sell you to keep you glued to Facebook. And it's not about journalism. It's about Mark Zuckerberg's profits. So when the print paper started to disappear, I just had an instinct, this is not going to be good. It's not that we're just shifting to another technology. It's just not going to be good because it's going to be turning journalism into the tool of the Bezoses, the Zuckerbergs, the Googles, and you know that's.
Well, let's hope not.
Not.
Thank God we have the
Look,
Atlantic
we have to
and
keep
the New
fighting.
Yorker.
We have to keep
and-
fighting. I
Yes.
know I've left you with a dark view of everything.
No.
I have to be honest with you. I have to pay you the respect of honesty, but I also have to tell you, we're not giving up. We journalists and we believers in democracy are not giving up. And so don't give up on the American people. We've made some wrong decisions, but there's a lot of fight left.
Dear George Becker, thank you very much. It was wonderful to have you here.
Wonderful to be here.
You will go outside to your books. There are many books, not only The Emergency, but all the others as well. And you all get books, and he will sign, and then you can maybe have the one or two other questions.
Thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, George. Just maybe one more minute for me to say some very brief words. We could be listening to you for hours, I think, because there's so many important things we have been talking about not giving up, about hope, about clarity. I just would like to say thank you also because we not only reached the end of this event, but the end of all the events of the festival happening in that house. And I would just like to thank to everybody who contributed to it, to all the authors, to all the moderators who have been on stage here, to all the team of Literaturhaus, to all the sponsors. I will make it short so that we have the chance to eat the soup together afterwards. And thanks to you for listening, to being here. I would like to invite you to stay a little bit longer. There is a soup being served on the 3rd floor and a piece of cake, some water, some wine. So we invite you to share this soup with us for 10 francs and to be our guests for a little continuation of this event. And there is a last event in the Cinema Xenix tomorrow evening with Zora del Buono. Swiss author, she has a carte blanche from us to present Zabriskie Point's film of her choice. So that much for the frame of the festival from me.
And we haven't finished now. Please excuse me that I'm switching to German. Ich möchte Schönen guten Tag. Ich möchte sehr herzlich Isabel gratulieren und danken. Sie kuratiert jedes Jahr diese Tage der internationalen Literatur, jetzt zum 11. Mal. Und ich bin wahnsinnig dankbar und froh, wie behutsam sie jedes Mal vorgeht. Es war dieses Mal, ich musste vorhin ein bisschen schmunzeln, wir haben beim Washington Square in New York begonnen und sind auf eine Art heute dorthin zurückgekehrt, aber komplett verändert nach diesen 3 Tagen. Und das ist das, was du immer wieder zeigst, also die Kraft der Literatur, dass man anschließend seine Perspektive wieder komplett verändert hat und als anderer Mensch auf die Welt blickt. Ich hoffe, das ist auch ein bisschen bei Ihnen angekommen. Vielen herzlichen Dank und einen großen Applaus an Isabel. Und dann möchte ich dieses Publikum gerne nutzen für 2 persönliche Bemerkungen, die nach diesem Gespräch mir auch während des Gesprächs in den Sinn gekommen sind. Gehen Sie am 8. März alle wählen, Sie wissen genau was. Ich darf das jetzt als Ex-SRF-Mitarbeiterin sagen. Es ist wahnsinnig wichtig, dass wir die öffentlich-rechtlichen Medien erhalten und auch den Preis dafür zahlen, dass es möglich ist, Journalismus zu machen. Dass der besser werden kann, darüber sind wir uns wahrscheinlich alle einig. Das Zweite ist, wir haben hier im Haus 400 nationale und internationale Zeitungen und Zeitschriften. Drüben im Lesesaal, dem historischen Lesesaal, in dem schon James Joyce und Lenin und Kurt Tucholsky saßen und gearbeitet haben und einige Mitglieder, die ich hier sehe. Sie können bei uns im Haus Mitglied werden. Das kostet 250 Stutz, aber wenn man sich überlegt, was man den Zeitungen zahlen muss, dann lohnt sich das in meinen Augen. Kommen Sie auf mich zu, ich habe Mitgliederkarten und jetzt essen wir einen guten Appetit.